for being here tonight. We've got a maximum capacity crowd. We can't let any more people in. The only way we can is if somebody leaves. So if you're standing out in the hall, you're not going to get in, okay? All right, I got just a couple things to tell you before we start our program. Please hold off on your questions until Miko and David invite you to join the conversation. The library building closes at 9 o'clock. We have to be out of here about 8:45. If we're still talking, we'll have to take the conversation outside.
Can you make the mic louder?
Yeah, they can't hear you. The wife's
Can you hear me? I think it's back here. I think I can get closer.
Just
to
get
my
closer
mouth.
up into the mic. Yeah.
Okay. Next, for people who are interested in this topic, Chris Hedges is at the Sanctuary for Independent Media tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. If you haven't heard Chris, you'll want to be there. And if you have heard him, I know you'll want to be there.
Yeah, that's right, Judy.
For information about Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace, and also to see a copy of this video, tomorrow or the next day it'll be on our website, and the address is BethlehemNeighborsForPeace.org. Okay, next, I want to thank everybody for coming out today, but I especially want to thank the staff at the library and the Board of Trustees for voting in favor of freedom of speech. I'm getting to the end. Okay, so if you want to see what we're up to next month or whenever, we're always doing something exciting. Check out our website. And now, Paul Reed will introduce our two speakers. Thank you.
You all came to hear one of the speakers, and we have a bonus tonight because our main speaker is joined by another published author and gentleman who happens to be Director of Global Studies at the University of Albany. We're very pleased and grateful that he has come to join us and serve as the interlocutor for our featured speaker. And I'd like at this time to ask you all to give a hand to David Banks. The man that you came to hear this evening was born and raised in a Zionist family in Israel. He was educated in Israel, Japan, and the United States. He has shared with caring audiences like this one what he has lived and learned over the years. His father was a general rising to prominence in the Israeli military during the 1967 war. It was a horrific incident during the time that his father was military governor of Gaza that led him to become a nonviolent activist for peace and justice. His son followed in his father's footsteps, became a member and leader in an elite military unit in the Israeli army. The tragic incident in Jerusalem led him to becoming the ardent, articulate advocate for equal rights that we're pleased to have with us tonight, Miko Peled.
And while we're thanking everyone, thank you to the Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace for
having me as well as Miko, and thank you again, yes, to the library for agreeing that free speech is important, right? So it's nice to meet you. We'll peek behind the curtain here. Well, there really was no curtain. Is that we've never talked before, right? We've never met. So this will be a very honest dialogue of no questions have been pre-selected whatsoever, right? And I just want to start actually with some recent events. The American Congress has just passed a resolution that equates anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism, or quite the opposite. Anti-Zionism equates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. What do you think might be the consequences of that? And what I would expect that you probably disagree with that, and if so, why?
Okay, everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Well, thank you all for coming this evening. It's nice to see a full house. Speak up more? Okay, there's a mic right on me, so I can bring it up higher. I can bring it up higher. How about now? All right. I said it's nice to see a full house. It's good to be here in Bethlehem, a city named, of course, after a very important city in Palestine, the city of Bethlehem. A city that has a great deal of significance. Oops.
Please put it on your tie. So it's
On my tie. All right, put on my tie. Okay. So anyway, so good to be here. Again, I echo what's been said about the hosts. Thank you for organizing this and the library for allowing the conversation to continue. I don't know, I can't imagine why in the world anybody would want to prevent this conversation from happening, particularly at a time when we see such horrendous violence being perpetuated against innocent civilians in Gaza, why we would not want to have this conversation at this time. I understand, though, that people who support the violence and who support apartheid would take issue with what I might have to say, and with revealing and delving deeper into the reasons and the rationale behind the racism and the violence that we're seeing against Palestinians. But that being said, that's not a reason not to have a conversation. So again, welcome everybody, and thank you to the library for allowing this to take place. So the attempt to silence criticism and rejection of Zionism is not new. Zionists from the very beginning had a problem because they realized that their entire existence has no legitimacy. Their claims that the Jewish members of the Jewish faith are somehow a nation like other nations, whereas Jews are united as a nation according to some of the greatest rabbis who ever lived, particularly Saadia Gaon, who lived in the 12th century in Baghdad and wrote that the Jews are a nation bound by their common faith. So Jews are not a nation like French or, Italians or anything like that. But the Zionists tried to claim that, and we know that that is not true. Then they claimed that the Bible, the Old Testament, which is a book of faith, is a history book, which of course we know is not true. And finally they said Palestine is our promised land, which again is not true. So they came up with this ideology that was based on lies, and they continued to develop these myths and these lies, and they had a problem because they needed legitimacy. And one of the tactics that they employed from the very early days all the way to today is to delegitimize anyone who challenges their claims. So if you're Jewish and you challenge their claims, as most Jewish people did when when Zionism just started, and this is before World War II, so there were millions of Jewish people in Europe and many Jews who lived in the Arab countries who rejected Zionism completely. So if they're Jews who rejected Zionism or questioned Zionism, they were not real Jews. If these were non-Jews that rejected it, they were anti-Semites. So everybody was flawed except for the Zionists, who came up with this racist supremacist ideology, which of course we know led to the apartheid state, which is called Israel. The apartheid state that's been imposed on historic Palestine and we know it's called Israel. Now, I don't think it's a secret that here in the United States, and certainly in Europe, in Western Europe, the Zionists have been hard at work for at least 100 years, promoting the idea of Zionism and promoting these stories that they made up, and trying to promote legitimacy and create legitimacy for their own case. And they did it in a very comprehensive way. They came out with a very compelling story, particularly after World War II. And they've had as I say, for a very long time, a very compelling story, and they had a very well-oiled, well-funded PR machine, a public relations machine that has been promoting these ideas. And the Zionists learned very early on that, particularly in America, all politics is local. So they worked very heavily on influencing politics, on influencing and having strong connections with media, influencing and having strong connections with culturally, in philanthropy. You know, I used to live in San Diego. One of the biggest philanthropists in San Diego are the Jacobs family, who own Qualcomm. Every library is, so many libraries and schools have Jacobs buildings. They saved the San Diego Symphony, and they're a Zionist family. So now if you live in San Diego and you don't really know much about Palestine, but this wonderful family is a Zionist, how could you possibly see any flaws in Zionism? So they did a very good job, and they continue to do this. Now, over the past few years, they had a more serious problem, because more and more people were realizing that Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism. And so in order to combat that, they came up with this notion to promote the idea that rejecting Zionism is anti-Semitic, to the point where they came up with what they call a new working definition of anti-Semitism, which is known as the IHRA working definition, which they've been pushing through governmental and non-governmental organizations for years now. And universities and churches and local councils and cities and states and on and on and on have been adopting this new working definition of anti-Semitism, which basically hints that if you are rejecting Zionism, then you are anti-Semitic. Now, to be quite honest and to be quite fair, there is no one presenting the other side. I mean, the Zionists have been hard at work for over 100 years. There's nobody, there's never been an organization, there's never been a body that has consistently, systemically, strategically been presenting the Palestinian case, the counter case, which of course relies on truth. So it's a much easier case to make, but it's never been made. So today, if American politicians want to make an informed decision, they can't. The Zionists have this very compelling story, the Jewish people back to their ancient homeland after 2,000 years, after the Holocaust. It's very compelling, building this wonderful modern state, of democracy, and so on. And there's nobody presenting another story. And so there's no wonder that it's easy for them to campaign and get whatever it was, all but one, I think, all but one members of Congress supporting this notion that somehow if you reject Zionism, you're anti-Semitic, which is absolutely absurd, because Zionism contravenes Jewish law. Zionism contravenes Jewish law. Jewish law prohibits Jews from sovereignty in the Holy Land, which is why ultra-Orthodox communities have historically rejected Zionism, and to this day, other than the ones who became settlers and became Zionists for all kinds of reasons I won't get into, the ultra-Orthodox Jews have rejected Zionism and reject the state of Israel, and many Jews who are not religious have rejected Zionism for other reasons, because it's a racist, supremacist ideology. Now, I don't think this has. I think it's a bad move, of course. I think it's dangerous, but I think it's a sign of desperation. I think it's a sign of desperation. Jumping up and down and claiming that what you say is true doesn't make it true. Anyone who's had kids before has had a 3-year-old jumping up and down swearing that they didn't do it. Well, we know you did it because we saw you do it. So Zionism is a racist, supremacist, settler colonial ideology that should have zero tolerance. Judaism is a faith. So to somehow claim that if you reject racism, violence, apartheid, and settler colonialism and supremacy, you're somehow racist and anti-Semitic is absolutely ludicrous. I mean, what are they going to think of next? And the only thing that is even more ludicrous is the fact that you can have members of the United States House of Representatives nodding their head and says, yes, it makes perfect sense. If you reject racism, you must be anti-Semitic. If you reject the genocidal policies that we've been seeing, especially now, passing it especially now, as we see the state of Israel's savagery, the brutality of murdering thousands and thousands of civilians, and now they come up with this resolution that rejecting that is anti-Semitic? What else can you say? How much crazier can you get? Why would grown adults, educated people say yes to something like this?
Intelligent.
But the problem is that this is the reality that exists today, and there is no serious voice to counter that yet.
Yeah. So I want to get to eventually what that serious voice would sound like and what it would say. But first, you said the word apartheid several times, and usually when apartheid comes up, I don't think everyone gets the full sense of exactly what the definition of that word means, especially with its Israel's connection to South Africa and like what apartheid really truly means as a way of forming a state. Could you kind of elaborate on just the word apartheid so that when people hear it in the future, they know everything it implies?
Well, apartheid, sure. I mean, apartheid has been designated as a crime against humanity. So the definition exists. It's very easy to find. Now, let me just expand on that just a little bit. I was born and raised in Jerusalem. I was 4 years old or so when during 1967, when East Jerusalem was occupied. And suddenly Jerusalem became a single city. Now, from that moment on, Jerusalem had two completely separate and segregated populations, as it does today. Israeli Jews who lived in privileged parts of the city, who had resources, who had nice schools and playgrounds and so forth, and the Arabs. We didn't say Palestinians in those days. And I remember as a child seeing the vast differences between what our neighborhoods look like and what their neighborhoods look like. As Israel is claiming that it is, a united city and a united city and a united city, I remember being 12, 13 years old, looking around. I didn't know the word apartheid, of course, but there was something wrong here. Completely wrong. So this is nothing new. Now, last year, Amnesty International came out with a report, an extended, detailed report that concludes that the state of Israel has been engaged in the crime of apartheid since it was established. And again, I'll say this again, apartheid is designated as a crime against humanity. So 3 years after the Holocaust, 3 years after the genocide of the Jews in Europe ended, a state that claims it is a Jewish state engaged or was allowed to engage in a crime against humanity, and I'll take it one step further. Apartheid is only one of the crimes against humanity that this state was allowed to engage in. Ethnic cleansing is a crime against humanity, which Israel, the Zionists and the state of Israel has been, in which the state of Israel has been engaged, and genocide. And people say, oh my God, genocide. Well, look at the definition of these laws, compare them to what has been going on in Palestine since the state of Israel was established, and you figure it out. It's very easy to see. Now, if you're going to establish a state for Jewish people in an Arab country, in a predominantly Muslim country. There will be the state for Jews. The only way to do it is through ethnic cleansing, genocide of the non-Jews, ethnic cleansing, of course, perpetrated against the non-Jews, and establishing an apartheid state, because you still have Palestinians who live there. So the only way you can create a state where Jewish people are privileged is an apartheid state, where there's state legalized racism, segregation between the two populations. I believe we said the questions were going to be later. And so today we have a reality where Israelis live in these, in these spheres of privilege. Minority, by the way, Israelis are the minority of the population today in historic Palestine, among a majority of Palestinians who do not enjoy the same privileges, those same rights. And we can talk later, if you want, about the differences between the kind of bureaucracies that under which Palestinians have to lead their lives, because it's different bureaucracies. Jews live under the same set of laws, regardless of where they live throughout the country. Palestinians are governed by different laws depending on where they live specifically within historic Palestine.
Yeah, let's get to that now, actually.
Sure.
Yeah,
okay.
let's do that. Right?
Yeah.
Things like whenever there is like an incursion into Gaza, whenever something big happens, you do get a glimpse, if ever so filtered, of like what the lives of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, and you hear the words open air prison, etc. But there are people who are non-Jews that do not live in Gaza or the West Bank. So like what could you go through, like what are the different sorts of lives that a non-Jew would live in what is the borders of what is currently considered Israel?
Yeah. So, and again, I'll refer you back, and I strongly recommend that everybody go home today and bring up the Amnesty report on apartheid, so you can see what they're talking about. It's very detailed. It took them several years to put together. It's extremely important for people to know, so when we use these words, we know what we're talking about. And the details, to understand the details of how this apartheid regime has been operating for 75 years. And if you don't like reading, if you can't read 200 pages or whatever, however long it is, there's a you can read the summary. But I strongly recommend that you read it, print it, and then give it to your friends. It's a very, very important thing. Now, so Israel created several different bureaucracies to govern Palestinians throughout historic Palestine. Let's start with the Palestinian citizens of Israel. Today, there are about 2 million Palestinians, citizens of Israel. Now, so their citizenship looks nothing like the citizenship of Israeli Jews. Nothing at all. In terms of resources, in terms of rights, in terms of job opportunities, opportunities to go to school, travel. The life of Palestinians is a life of terror. It's a life of terror, of everyday terror. They know that they can be killed and there will be no consequences. They know that they can be put in jail, there will be no consequences, there's no recourse. Now, within 1948 Palestine, which is also known as pre-1967 Israel, it's got all kinds of names. It's basically 1948 Palestine. You have the entire southern part of Palestine, which is called the Nakab, which is almost 50%, or more than 50% of historic Palestine. That's where the Palestinian Bedouin reside. Today there are about 300,000 Palestinian Bedouin who reside in the Nakab. They are governed by a bureaucracy which is called the Agency for the Development of the Negev. The Negev is the Hebrew name for Nakab. And basically, that bureaucracy's job is to push Palestinian Bedouin off their lands, whatever little land they still are allowed to maintain, and they have their own law enforcement and home demolition process, and so on. And while Israelis living in Israeli settlements in the Nakab enjoy some of the highest standards of living among Israelis, the poorest of the poor among Israeli citizens are the Bedouin in the Nakab. And we're talking about a kind of poverty where there are no roads, no access to medical care, no access to water, and no access to electricity. That's the kind of discrimination we're talking about. So that's the southern part of Palestine. Almost 50%, or about 50% of Palestine is the Nakab. And it's a desert, but it's a very fertile desert. It's a desert that's relatively rich in water, so it's very good agricultural land. But the Palestinian Bedouin, who are traditionally farmers and cultivated the land, are prohibited from cultivating and are prohibited from engaging in farming. If I went back tomorrow, I could get a ranch and I'd be subsidized, the water would be subsidized, the land would be subsidized, and I could do whatever farming I wanted. Palestinian Bedouins whose land this was are prohibited from farming. Over the last 5 or so years, 5, 6 years at least, there have been close to 2,500 home demolitions in the Nakab alone. How many of those? So about 10,000 homes demolished in about 4 or 5 years. How many of those would you guess are homes of Israeli Jews?
Oh, 0. 10,000.
Nothing. 0. So is it possible that only Palestinians built without a permit? Is it, because that's usually the excuse. Is it possible that only Palestinians violate the building guidelines and building laws? Is it possible? I know Israelis who built without a permit, who added a balcony, who closed the balcony, added a room, whatever. No, it doesn't make sense. But that's the reality. You never see, if an Israeli builds without a permit, they get a fine, they get a report, an inspector comes, they go to trial in a few years. You never see the army close down the street and demolish the home. That never happens. And now on top of that, they just passed a law a couple of months ago that on top of the demolition, they also stop their water supply, stop their electricity supply, and stop their phone service as punishment. Now that's just the southern part. The rest of the country, the northern part, they live under a different set of laws. Then you've got, and there are some 40,000 home demolition orders, and I'm just talking about home demolitions as one aspect. Home demolition orders for Palestinians in the northern part of Palestine, without Jerusalem, without the West Bank. I'm only talking about 1948 Palestine, where citizens of Israel live. You can buy a gun, shoot someone in a Palestinian town in any part of 1948, and no, the police will never come. They will never come. Then you have the Palestinians who live in what used to be the West Bank. There used to be this thing called the West Bank. It no longer exists. Israel has built heavily in there. It's completely been integrated into the state of Israel, except for what they define as large pockets of alien populations. That's some 3.5 million Palestinians living in ghettos. And again, according to the definition, the Israeli definition, these are large pockets of an alien population. See, the indigenous people are not the aliens. They're the alien population. Some 3.5 million people. And they live under a strict military law. They have no rights whatsoever. Once again, they can be shot, they can be killed. They don't, they have even less recourse than the little recourse that Palestinian citizens of Israel have, even if it's only a formality. Then we have the Gaza Strip, like you said, which is an open-air prison. And then there's also Palestinians who live on the outside in refugee camps, languishing because they're not permitted. Israeli law does not permit them to return. Some 6 million Palestinians living in refugee camps, languishing in camps, only because Israel denies them the right to go back home. And then there's one other important issue. I know you have other questions. And that is the issue of water. All of the water throughout the entire country is governed by an Israeli agency called Mikorot. You may have heard of it. And Mikorot likes to export its expertise in what they call making the desert bloom, which we should talk about also. this idea. But anyway, Mekorot governs all the water and allocates the water. Palestinians today make up about 7 million of the population. Israelis are around 6 million. So there's almost about 1 million or so people, more Palestinians. Palestinians are allocated, out of the entire water supply of the country, Palestinians are allocated 3% of the water. 3. Palestinians are allocated 3% of the water. So, it is so efficient that if you've been to Palestine, you know you have a Palestinian village across the street, sometimes from an Israeli settlement. You have an Israeli neighborhood across the street from an Israeli neighborhood, an Israeli settlement, a Palestinian across the street. On the Israeli side, which is how I grew up, you have lawns, and you go to the pool, and you cook, and you take a shower, and you never think about water as a problem. The Palestinians across the street may or may not get something like 10, 12, 15 hours of running water per week, and they don't know when they're going to come, they don't know how long they're going to last. There's water insecurity, even when it's across the street. And this doesn't matter where the Palestinians live throughout the entire country. This is the case. Of course, it's more severe in the Gaza Strip. Yep. So when we talk about the apartheid, it's a very sophisticated kind of apartheid because Israel designated different parts of the population, different bureaucracies to deal with them, including sometimes different forms of law enforcement.
Yes, let's continue with water rights then, because while it is a desert, it could rain sometimes. Why? What are the rights around collecting rainwater, for example, or like what are the different ways that water is managed? As you were saying, you wanted to get into more. What does that look like?
Well, no, everything that has to do with water is controlled by Mekorot, is controlled by Israel. Palestinians have no rights. Now the desert is only the southern part. Now the rest of Palestine is not a desert. I mean, it's a very diverse country. So it's not all desert, certainly. But Palestinians are not permitted to dig a well. I mean, it's very, very specific to what Palestinians are not allowed to do. The prohibitions and the laws that deny them the right to do things are unbelievable. There was a piece by Israeli human rights lawyer Michael Sfard who wrote this about something else. But he talks about mountains of regulations and oceans of laws that interfere and restrict the lives of Palestinians in general.
So when we talk about the rules and regulations that are going to, manage people's lives, I tend to think about liberals, right? So I want to. That's my way of maybe trying to get us to start talking about the role of liberal Zionism and what appears to me, at least, to be an inflection point here, where it seems my read of the situation is that it's increasingly difficult to manage a liberal Zionism, both in the United States and domestically in Israel. That we just saw lots of protest around Bibi Netanyahu's attempt to redo the Constitution, to reduce the court's ability to rein him in. We saw a lot of protest around that. Now, those protests didn't seem to extend to any sort of solidarity with Palestinian people, right? And so like the question really is like the conservative push is very straightforward, and the logic seems very direct. Whereas the liberal perspective, one, seems to be dying kind of at the ballot box. They don't seem to be doing well in the Knesset, but then also it doesn't seem to be able to say directly like, well, yes, I believe in human rights and people should be kept safe, but also Israel has the right to exist. These two things in the face of what are we at now, 15,000 people dead, doesn't seem to comport with one another. So what is your read on the possibility that a liberal left-center Zionism, how long can that last? Before people just like don't even give it conscience out of pocket.
Yeah. Well, just about, you said 15,000 dead. It's over. The official number from the Palestinian Health Ministry, which is downballing the number for now, is over 20,000. The expectation is that once the real numbers come in, and all the thousands of missing babies who have been crushed and burned by the Israeli warplanes are revealed, the number is going to exceed 50,000 deaths, civilian deaths. And so, just to clarify where we stand here. Yeah, the notion of liberal Zionism is that somehow.
Just hand him the
Is this working? Yeah, I'll just do this. The notion, is this all right?
Okay, there we go. Okay, now I have a wired one, so we're good. Okay.
The notion of liberal Zionism is an absurd notion that you could have a racist, violent, apartheid state that is somehow also wonderful and liberal and peace-loving and believes in human rights. It's an oxymoron, and it's an absolute impossibility. But what they've done is they said, no. Among us, among the Israelis, we want to have our own little pretense difference between the liberals and non-liberals, And I'll give you an example of how absurd this notion of liberal Zionism is, okay? During the protests against Netanyahu and against the so-called judicial reform, which is much more than a judicial reform, but these were protests by, the very top echelon of Israeli society, the privileged among the privileged. Now, mind you, it's interesting that when other parts of Israeli society were protesting, in the 70s and 80s, the descendants of Arab Jews were protesting. About a decade ago or so, or a little bit less, the Ethiopian Jews were protesting. Nobody really cared. Now the privileged ones are protesting. Suddenly Joe Biden takes an interest. Okay? Now, among the privileged of the privileged, the cream of the crop are the Israeli Air Force pilots. These mass murder war criminals who have no problem dropping tons of bombs on children in Gaza and Lebanon and other places. But they are considered, should somebody be removed? Should they be removed?
Okay, we have a long list of people that want to come in here. If you don't want to listen to this, you can leave. Ma'am, you need to go, ma'am.
Do we have security here?
You have to take it outside now.
You better behave. Nobody said nothing.
That's enough.
Miko, wait till they're gone, because there's tons of people waiting.
Yeah, there are tons of people waiting outside. If you don't want to listen, you can go. Okay. No, don't. No one else. Just let her go. Just let her go.
That's not hate. That's not hate.
We can
Hate
go.
speech.
It's not hate speech.
Yeah, it's okay.
All right.
Okay.
Have someone else come in if you can handle the conversation and not scream.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
There's a lot of people out there that
Yeah.
want to hear.
Yep. So. All right. Okay. Does anyone else need to leave?
Forget your jacket, sir.
Okay, we got a seat up here, and we have some back there.
It's not hate speech.
Okay.
I even know why I'm responding. I'm gonna sit down.
Yeah.
Just listen.
Yeah, it's okay. All right. All right, we're good to go. I appreciate everyone. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Good. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Good. Yeah. I would like it to be quiet now. Yeah. All right. Okay. So we were talking.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
During those anti-Netanyahu protests, the Israeli Air Force pilot reservists announced that they would not show up for reservist duty. Now they have to show up for duty, all the time. They need to keep their flight hours. And they announced, there's a whole bunch of them that announced they will not show up to duty because they are going to the protests. Their belief in democracy and the rule of law was so strong that they said it's even more important than our ability to, maintain our military training. During this time, there was an assault on Gaza. Immediately, they stopped caring about democracy, human rights, and they went in, did their training, and went to bomb Gaza. Now, as we're seeing the savagery, this massive, uncalled for, unjustified brutality against civilians in Gaza, we don't see these Air Force pilots protesting at all. We don't see them protesting. They're quite happy to keep bombing as they do. So that's the hypocrisy. That's the lie of the liberal Zionism. Zionism, I'll say this again, belongs in the same column as anti-Semitism, as white supremacy, and all other forms of racism. Violent racism for which there should be no tolerance. Liberal, not liberal, this color, this shade, that shade. There are no shades in racism. I have a great Jewish friend in San Diego. He goes, I reject racism. What's your position? It's very simple. And when you ask that to Zionists, they say, yes, but. There's always a but. On racism, there's no but. You reject it, or you're a part of it. You're accepted. And Zionism is no different than all other forms. So liberal Zionism, again, it's nonsense. It's a myth.
So then, there's something interesting, both mostly in American politics. Now let's talk about the conservatives, particularly evangelical Christians. They seem to really appreciate Israel, right? What is evangelical Christians' role in America's support of Israel? Why are evangelical Christians, who I should remind everyone, prior to Reagan, basically did not vote. They were not a voting bloc of really any sort. They didn't see it as a terrestrial concern worth their time. But ever since Reagan, it seems like evangelicals have become a very, very secure voting bloc for the right, and have almost across the board supported Israel. Why is that?
Well, Zionism was a Christian evangelical invention. I'm sure you've heard the line, "A people without a country for a country without a people." This was invented by Christian Zionists before the Zionists took it on. Before there were Jews who created the Zionist movement. Many of the Zionist ideas that we know today, like that particular lie, among others, were adopted by the Jewish Zionists from Christian Zionists, from Christian evangelicals, So this has been part of their agenda for a very long time, and the fact that these secular Jews who decided to adopt Zionism and develop it took it on so with such vigor. This is great for evangelical Christians, because they have this whole belief that the Jewish people, that the Jews today are the descendants of an ancient tribe that used to live in Palestine some 3,000 years ago called the Hebrews. That's part of this story, that's part of the myth. And that these Jews today all have to return to that part of Palestine, which they call the land of Israel, in order for the second Messiah coming, and all kinds of, that sort of nonsense.
So, just two Jews talking right here. What's their plan for us when that happens?
I don't think it's anything good.
Yeah, no, it's not good, right? Okay, all right. Okay.
Although, okay, if you wanna, I had a good friend who became kind of a born again, and she said to me, "That's not true. As long as you accept Jesus Christ as Lord, you will be fine." So it's not quite that way, but yeah, of course, it has nothing to do with it's a deeply, deeply, of course, not to say crazy, but certainly anti-Semitic, anti-Semitic view.
God hates them for this one weird trick that gets you out of being. Yeah. Okay. So let's keep with the religion for a moment, and I'm looking through some of the questions that some people already gave me, and there's one in particular that for an atheist, right? Where would someone who identifies strongly as an atheist, where would their politics go here, and how much should they ascribe to religion specifically as an institution as part of this the Palestine-Israel conflict?
That's a really good question. What makes the Palestinian issue unique, in my opinion, is that it's not about religion and it's not about politics. It has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with politics. It's a question of values. I had this conversation once with some Zionists who came to a lecture that I gave, one of the very few times that they showed up. And they were angry because this was, again, during a time of Israeli Air Force planes massacring thousands of innocent civilians. And I spoke the way I did, and they said, "How dare you speak like this," and so on. I said, "Look, it's a question of values." And I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples. We know that Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza, there was a lot of discussion about Al-Shifa Hospital as it was being bombed and so forth. And the claim that the Zionists made and Israel made is that somehow under the hospital there were fighters or there was weapons or something. And therefore it was okay to do what they did.
We found that, right?
So, here's where the values come in. Let's say that the devil himself lived under the hospital. The devil himself lived under the hospital. Does that justify harming a single hair of the head of a child? Yes or no? No. End of story. That's the only question that matters. Because if you say yes, the conversation is over. If anybody thinks that that scenario justifies, never mind killing, never mind burning, never mind destroying, harming a single hair on the head of a child, if anybody who feels that that is justified, goodbye, the conversation is over. There's nothing we can say to each other anymore. It's a question of values. And on the larger issue, the question is this. You either support racism, apartheid, and violence and supremacy, and then go ahead and support Israel, but own it. Own it. Go ahead and support Israel because that's what it is, and own it. Some people think that's fine to murder, thousands, tens of thousands of people in Gaza. Some people think it's fine to maintain an apartheid regime. Fine, own it though. Because the other side talks about justice, talks about freedom, talks about equal rights, and talks about the possibility, really the only possibility, of peace between Israelis and Palestinians. So these are the two choices. Take out Israeli, take out Palestinian. One is a vote for racism and violence, which will never, of course, cannot possibly lead to peace, right? I mean, racism and violence is the opposite of peace. The other calls for justice, calls for liberation, calls for freedom, calls for equality, which will inevitably lead to peace between the two nations. So, do you believe in peace or do you believe in racism? And then own it. It's a question of values. Own it, because the support for the one side we know can never, ever, under any circumstance, lead to peace. The other, peace is inevitable. So it's a question of values. And then you own it Find what your inner self, find out what your values are, and then own it. And that's why, and I'm sure it's a question that's coming up, someone like me, who was raised in a deeply Zionist family, my grandfather's signature sits on the Israeli Declaration of Independence. I had a great uncle who was the president of the state of Israel, and my father was a general. Not just a general, but a general of that generation of generals that everybody thinks were gods. And here I am telling you, well, what I've already said, I won't repeat it. But the point is, it's about finding your values. Once you find out about the injustice, do you continue to support it? Or do you reject it? Regardless of your background, regardless of your religion, regardless of your education, regardless of your family. And that's why I'm here today saying the things that I say.
So, I'm going to bring us around to towards the end of our conversation so we can start to get to audience questions. I'm going to combine a couple here and say that, you know, since, as far as we've found so far, the devil does not live under the Al-Shifa Hospital. And not too many people live under there either, it seems. Haven't found a lot under there. But it seems strange then that, you know, the United States would still then say, you know, to make a local connection here, build bunker buster bombs in Water Valit and send them to Israel, right? I'm just going to distill several of these into one very simple question. What does the United States get out of all this? Why are we in this special relationship? I know it's a small question, but like what is it that the United States just can't get enough of this one particular kind of violence? And we're not trying to get rid of the genocide in Myanmar. We weren't too excited about that one, but for some reason this one seems really important to at the core of American interests. Why is that?
And also the amnesty report about Myanmar was accepted. The one about Palestine was not, which is also an interesting difference. You know, many decades ago, some of us are old enough to either remember or remember to have learned about it. There was an American president who warned America from this thing called the industrial-military complex. Industrial complex, sorry. Military-industrial complex, thank you. See, I wasn't there yet. I wasn't born yet. What he envisioned is a fraction of what exists today. A fraction. I don't think he could have possibly imagined the monstrosity that exists today in terms of this enormous, you know, industry. Now, we all know that about half of the aid that go, the $4 billion or so dollars in aid that go to Israel come back here in arms sales. And so it's kind of a laundering of money. So that's a big part of it. That's a big part of it. The other part is, what I said earlier, there's nobody presenting the other case. So American politicians, if they wanted, let's assume for a moment at least some of them would want to make an informed decision on this issue. They do not have the tools to do so because they've never been presented in a comprehensive, well-organized manner, consistent manner, the other story. All they hear is this one compelling story. Yep. So it's very easy to be one-sided.
I think that's a very apt answer, and it lets me slide right into that the last question that I have that again combines a couple of these here. You know, like the ability to speak out and organize on this. I think everyone here might, or not everyone here, but I think a lot of people would want like a magic word or an argument that suddenly gets everyone to realize what's going on, right? And this one's been sitting at the top for me for a while, is that what's going to work to make people realize the depths of oppression of Palestinians, both Muslims and Christians, which, you know, and this also says here Ethiopian Jews, and so like let's talk about what that opposite message would be, because you're going up against like a lot of arguments made over decades, right? And a lot of assumptions and people's facts are colored by and shaped by the again those decades of effort to make Israel seem like what it is in the United States. So how do you start? What's the opposite?
Education. The only way to do it is through a comprehensive look. Like I said earlier, the Zionists very early on invested very heavily so that they would have a hand, they would have influence in education, in culture, in philanthropy, in local politics, in national politics. You know, there are Zionist nonprofits that's what they do in every state. They check the social studies textbooks. They check and they approve or disapprove, and they have discussions on this issue, social studies textbooks, to make sure that this issue is taught in a way that is favorable to their perspective. You know, that's you know, talk about micromanaging. I mean, they are all the way down to the very nitty-gritty of how education is done. So education is the key, and what is missing, lacking, and I and a few friends in Washington, D.C. are trying to remedy that through an initiative that we're working on, needs to be remedied in a systemic way so that decision makers, the press, the diplomatic corps, and the public are presented with, I don't want to say a handbook, but at least something like a handbook where they can have the answers to these questions. You know, every campus has a Hillel house, which is basically a Zionist, holding place. It's a Zionist institution. On top of that, they have whatever the mascot is, the blah blah for Israel on every campus. You know, they've got a handbook. They know how to answer. They know how to attack. They know what to say. On the Palestinian side, it's just a bunch of kids who are trying to make this work and stand up for what's right. So until that is remedied on a large scale, in a well-planned scale, just like theirs is, it's not going to change. It's all about education. It's all about educating and presenting this in a way that is, you know, I don't think it's a problem to make it compelling, because this, the Palestinian story is based on truth. And we can give, you know, one example if you want.
Please.
The claim that I said earlier, that they made the desert bloom, that they came to a country without a people. There are two books that I strongly recommend. One of them was written, co-authored by Francesca Albanese, Dr. Francesca Albanese, who is now the UN rapporteur for the occupied territories. And it came out it was reprinted a couple of years ago, and it's called Palestinian Refugees in International Law. It's a very scholarly work. And in this, they describe, among many things, not only how strong the case is for Palestinian refugees. In fact, it gets stronger with time, not weaker by time. Their case for reparations, their case for return, but also what was stolen. You know, the impression that people talk about 1948, about homes that were stolen, land that was stolen, but there was also entire cities were taken. I mean, there were Palestine, there were entire cities. Haifa, Akka, Tabariya, Jaffa, Lid, Jerusalem, Berisabeh. Still, I mean, you could go on and on. These are just the cities. Major cities that were stolen, taken. Public property that was taken. People had money in the bank. The money was stolen. Produce from the fields. Jaffa oranges is an example. You know, Palestine was exporting citrus. Palestine was exporting olive oils. Palestine was exporting cotton. Palestine was exporting barley, and on and on and on. All that was stolen. So there's much more than that. In other words, the Zionists didn't take a barren country and made it bloom. They stole a country that was in full bloom and made it their own and pretended that it's theirs. And then they perpetuated this ridiculous myth that somehow they made the desert bloom. In the Naqab, if you look at, and I've seen these, if you look at aerial photos taken by the British when the British took Palestine,
You see tracts of cultivated land. These were the Palestinian Bedouin who were cultivating the land. They didn't make anything bloom. They stole stuff that was in full bloom. So something happened. On the 15th of May, 1948, the world was hit by amnesia because the world was doing commerce and business with Palestine. Maps, said Palestine. Even this horrific plan called the Partition Plan by the United Nations was called the Partition of Palestine. Suddenly everybody forgot. There was no Palestine, it's all Israel. They brought out this name and let the apartheid regime use it as their name, imposed it on Palestine, and that's it. The world forgot. From that moment on, there was no Palestine, it's all Israel. Even today, people say Palestine, Israel, Israel, Palestine. What do you mean Palestine, Israel, Israel, Palestine? It's Palestine. The fact that this group of settlers and colonizers took a country and gave it a different name doesn't change the fact that it's Palestine. But this is one of those things that unless you're really well read, really well informed, and willing and able to put all the time in, you're not going to know. So unless it's presented to you in a way that's, as part of your education, it's not going to happen. And that's exactly the problem.
They also, if I remember correctly, called themselves colonists until that was a word you weren't supposed to use.
They use it today in Hebrew.
Yeah, okay.
In Hebrew, the word mitnachel is a very proud word. Kovesh, mitnachel, conquer, a settler. It's everywhere. I can't forget. I'll never forget this. I was meeting with a Palestinian friend in Jaffa, and he said to me, "Let's meet by the occupiers parking lot." I said, "The who?" "The occupiers parking lot. It's sitting on the street called the occupiers street." In Hebrew, people don't even think about this. I have friends who live on Settler Road. They don't think anything of it. Settler was a good thing. They came to settle the land. Of course, they were pioneers. They're great people. They don't think about it. In English, they have a problem. Don't you dare say settler. Don't you dare say occupier. Don't you dare say colonizer. But in Hebrew, they have no problem.
Okay, well, those were my questions. Thank you so much for answering them. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to turn to audience questions now. If you gave me your question and you don't feel like I did it justice, I will give it back to you and you can ask it yourself. So the way this is going to work, I'm actually going to give you this one. I'm going to do my best Jerry Springer impression by going around, and I'm going to, just like he did, also a good Jew, hand you the microphone, but I am going to hold on to it. All right? You'll ask your question, Miko will answer it, and then we'll move on. I'm sure there are plenty of people that want to ask questions, and again, the library closes at 9. We're giving everyone ample time to do this, all right? And then, and I will ask two things of you. One, make it a question, right? Okay, it's a question. It says question, Q&A, right? So have your Qs, not your comments, your Qs, questions. Second thing is that you have to be respectful of our guest. If you are not respectful of our guest, I'm just taking the microphone away and we're done, all right? So, challenging questions, you can take a challenging question, right? Yeah, you can take a couple of challenging questions. You don't need to use kid gloves on him, but it does have to be respectful. That's just something that I personally, as an educator, have to do, and all of my TikTok adult students are capable of it, so you can too. Okay. All right. So let me see those hands. All right. That's what I thought. Okay. So I'm gonna make the rounds. All right. So I'm gonna pick a hand. You can put your hand down, rest it, and then we'll go again. All right. This will happen. All right. First one.
Keep the mic.
My question is, we're talking about the Palestinian state or country. Until 1967, as war, you didn't have to ask for a Palestinian state or be identification or something from nobody, because all this area was under the rule of the Jordanians. Why, before 67, nobody came to the Jordanian and said, hey guys, we want our own state? Suddenly, it became a huge problem after 67.
Why don't we take a couple more?
Okay.
And then I'll just.
Okay.
You have a piece of paper?
You got the, all right, another question, okay.
Let's take maybe 3 at a time.
Okay.
What about Hamas?
What about Hamas? All right, and,
Or the chances somebody answer that.
Can you please tell us what happened in 2005 in Gaza and how many Jewish people live today in Gaza and how many Gaza people can go and work in Israel? Can you explain it? And I just want to have one comment. I'm Israeli, I'm Jewish, I have no problem with Muslim, and I think that what he's doing is trying to put us apart, for real. Many of the facts
Okay.
are not right.
Okay.
all right,
Gotcha.
thank you.
Okay. That's 3. That's 3.
All right, that's 3. Let's let Miko speak to those. Thank you all 3 of you.
The first question, I don't accept the premise of the question that before 1967 there was no issue of a Palestinian liberation. It's not true. The Palestinian issue and the issue of Palestinian, excuse me, can I have some water? The issue of Palestinians wanting their liberation, wanting their freedom, and wanting their country back began as soon as Palestine was taken by the Zionists in 1948. 1967 was just, thank you. 1967 was just the second step in the Zionist taking of Palestine, kind of what they call finishing the job. And then a Zionist idea came up, which is a Zionist idea, of the two-state solution as we know it today, where a Palestinian state might be limited to just these 2 little areas called the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And I'll tell you a little story about that. I'll expand on it a little bit. So my father was one of the generals who planned and then executed the 1967 assault by Israel against his Arab neighbors. I think calling it a war creates a misunderstanding. It was a brutal assault by Israel against its neighbors for the sake of taking land. And the generals themselves said this. My father and others said it after the war. And the war actually only lasted 5 days, by the way. You know why they call it 6 days? The 6-day war, because in the Jewish prayer book, the term 6 days shows up a lot, in reference to the miracle of creation, that the world was created in 6 days. So to create this impression, this connection between the miracle of creation and the miracle of the 1967 war. And I have on my podcast a conversation with Phil Weiss from Mondo Weiss, and he talks about the fact that very educated secular Jews in America, and others, not only Jews, refer to that as a miracle. They don't believe in miracles or religion at all, but that to them was a miracle. So there was no miracle. But on the 5th day of the war, the Israeli military high command met. And at that meeting, my father stood up and said, we now have an opportunity to solve the Palestinian question to our advantage. We will offer the Palestinians a small state on a small fraction of historic Palestine, 2 regions within Palestine that Israel created, that Israel drew, which are called the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, because historically there's no such thing as a Gaza Strip or a West Bank drawn the way it is. Israel determined as her boundaries, after the 48, after it was established. He stood up and he said this, and the other generals, his comrades, Yitzhak Rabin and others, looked at him and said, what are you talking about? We just finished the job of taking our land back, and you want us to give it back to someone? And he said, what we should do now is we should give the Sinai back to the Egyptians, the Golan Heights back to the Syrians, allow the Palestinians a state in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip with East Jerusalem as their capital. We will have peace agreements with all these countries, and we can move on. And he pursued this. He remained in the military for another year before he retired. And his comrades said, look, nobody wants to talk about this nonsense right now. And as he was saying these words, the smoke was still, coming out of the war, of this assault. Israeli bulldozers were destroying Palestinian towns, Palestinian neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, throughout the West Bank, and building massively for Jews only in those areas. Immediately. Areas within East Jerusalem, within the old city, were bulldozed hundreds of thousands of Palestinians expelled. As he was still saying these words, Israel didn't have to think, didn't take a minute even, before they began the destruction, because this was going to be a part of the state of Israel. So, the conversation about two states was later on adopted by Palestinians as kind of a gesture. Fine, we will give up the struggle to free all of Palestine. We will give up on the idea, which is a Palestinian idea, of a democratic state with equal rights in historic Palestine, for this idea of a two-state solution. And again, Israel continued to build and build and build and make it absolutely clear that this will never happen. Every single government throughout, from that moment on, did everything they can to make sure that there would never be any Palestinian state. And then Israelis say, see, we want a Palestinian state, and they won't want it. Who created a single state from the river to the sea? Not the Palestinians, Israel did. Israel created a single state for Jews only, with privilege and rights for Jews only, from the river to the sea. And when Palestinians say, no, but how about equality from the river to the sea? How about a democratic state with equal rights? They say, see, that's anti-Semitic. How dare they say equality? We want privilege, we want supremacy. That's our idea. So this notion that somehow before 1967 nobody talked about Palestinian rights is an outright lie. So it's either a lie or it comes out of ignorance. I'm not sure what the particular case here is, but it's either a lie or it's ignorance, because it's absolutely false. It's absolutely based on false.
You're calling me ignorant
Now,
or not? You're telling the people completely lies. You cannot call me ignorant.
Do you want to stop him or what's the
Yes, please.
Okay, the other question, the second question was Hamas. I'm thinking, what was the chance of somebody asking about Hamas? You know, it's very interesting. I'll answer the question on a larger context. We hear a lot in the news, the war between Israel and Hamas, or the war between Israel and Gaza, or this war that started by Hamas, or the war that started by Gaza. Hamas is part of the Palestinian resistance. It's a resistance organization. It was established just as the first Intifada in the late 80s as part of the Palestinian resistance movement. Resistance organizations don't start wars. Resistance organizations resist. They resist oppression. They respond to oppression. They respond to violence. And the war is not between Israel and this faction or that faction, and certainly not between Israel and the Gaza Strip, although the state of Israel declared war on the Palestinian people in 1948. Yes. It was before it was a state of Israel, it was the Zionist movement. They declared war on the Palestinian people, and it's been going on for 75 years. And now Israel has a massive army. Palestinians have never had an army. Palestinians never ever had a tank. They've never had a warplane, ever. And so, do you want these people to maybe be quiet or leave or figure out what they're going to do?
All right, are we good? All right, thank you.
And so somehow this idea that it's a war anyway, it's not a war, because a war is something that happens between two armies, between two military forces. Here we have an army versus civilians and small guerrilla groups who try to, defend their people. But that's all I have to say about Hamas. Hamas is a resistance organization that is doing what resistance organizations do. Another question was about the Gaza disengagement of 2005. So in 2005, the Israeli government decided to take out the settlers from the Gaza Strip, some 7,000, I believe, or 6,000 settlers from the Gaza Strip, and close down the Gaza Strip so that when Israel decides to bomb and when Israel decides to impose a siege, then they won't have these settlers in the way, because it costs a lot of money to protect these settlers, to use the army to protect the settlers. Now, the Gaza Strip has been a prison, going back till when the Gaza Strip was established in the early 50s, late 49, 52, in that period, as a place in which to push hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees from southern Palestine. And ever since then, it's been a disaster area. So this region, the Gaza city and other cities along the region, which were known for citrus fruit, for fishing, for beauty, the city of Gaza has a rich history, culture, rich monastic history, and on and on and on, suddenly became a prison. Suddenly became this massive refugee camp, and of course today it's even worse. So the disengagement was just a tactical move by the Israeli government so that they can focus on the Palestinians only and not worry about Israeli settlers getting in the way.
Okay, we're going to take another 3. All right, I'm going to go first here.
Hi, Imam Rafiq Umar, Muslim community, Bethlehem. Question is, I'm a person of resolution, right? And so I always look for solutions. If you were to write down a list of demands, and these were the Israeli demands, what would you say those demands are that the Palestinians, if they agreed to or accepted, that would end conflict? And I think you kind of already answered this, but do you think a two-state solution is a possibility? Thank you.
All right, second one.
Sorry. Thank you for the talk. So Miko, in your book, you mentioned that there was this hope of peace at the time of Rabin before his assassination, and at the same time he also had the break your bones policy, and you mentioned that throughout history it's always been one government after another that's been oppressing the Palestinian generation after generation. Do you think there actually was a concerted effort on the side of the Israeli government to actually extend peace to the Palestinians, or was it thinly veiled and it gave the image that they wanted it, but they actually never did?
All right, and one more. You take over here.
Okay, it's not fair. Each person is asking 3 questions.
Hi. So, if you could help the audience understand, there is a famous quote by Baban saying, "The Arabs never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity," and so they're blamed for not being the partners in peace and walking away from that beautiful golden opportunity to have their own state. Could you help these audience understand what that ridiculous proposal that they were trying to shove down their throat as a two-state solution?
Oh, I have a mic, that's right. Okay, good questions. Israel does not want to end the conflict. Israel made it clear that peace is not a strategic objective, and they made it clear very early on when the state of Israel was established. Their objective is to be the toughest, meanest, craziest bully in the neighborhood so that nobody messes with them. That's it. And throughout the decades since Israel was established, whenever there was any politician who pushed for a more peaceful policy, they were pushed out. Moshe Sharet being the most famous of them all. He was Israel's second prime minister for about 5 minutes. And he was Israel's foreign minister, and he was a well-known diplomat. He's like the Israeli John Adams, the prime minister that nobody remembers ever existed. And he was pushed out because he opposed Israel's assault against Egypt in 1956. And other assaults as well. So anyway, it was made very, very clear. And the ideology behind this was articulated in a eulogy that was made, very famous, by Moshe Dayan, who was the general with the eye patch, that he made in 1956, where he said, these Palestinian refugees are looking at us with hatred. They want us to get out. We took their land. We're cultivating their land. We're living in their homes. We're living in their cities. And they want to kill us for that. They're looking at us. They're hungry. They're homeless. Therefore, we must always make sure that we have our fist, that we hold the weapons, the strongest weapons. And so these were early signs of that. And then we see a 75-year history of a country that clearly not missed an opportunity, but erased any opportunity to end this, to resolve the conflict. As long as Palestinians are dying at a higher rate and have no military force anyway, they can't defend themselves. The other Arab countries are out of the equation. There's no reason to end the conflict. Israel doesn't have a reason to end the conflict. And so it's not a strategic objective. There's no reason for it to do so. And so there's no list of demands because that's not something they want anyway, you know. And we've seen this, like I said, over the years, that every opportunity that it seemed like maybe there's a chance here, maybe something's going to happen, it was made very, very clear, you know. Even the peace agreement with Egypt was done with pain, great pain, great pain. But it was done. But that's it. And there was a larger strategic reason to get Egypt out of the cycle, so to kind of disarm Egypt so it's no longer something that Israel has to worry about. Okay, the two-state solution was never a possibility. It was a myth from the very beginning. Like I explained earlier, Israel made sure that there would never be a Palestinian state on any part of historic Palestine. And they did it by creating, like I said, a single state, albeit an apartheid state, from the river to the sea. So it's never been a possibility. It's always been a myth, and it's certainly not a possibility today. And I don't even know what the virtue of a two-state solution is.
Miko, we've been asked to not say river to the sea.
Why not? They're the River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea. That's the geographical description of the country.
That's a joke.
It's a geographical description of the country. I'm sorry?
Trying to allow this program to happen.
No, I understand, but I'm saying
It's like a
the
historic
description, the
saying.
geographical description of the country is between, and you can call it Israel. I mean, you can say it's Israel, but it's from the River Jordan. Pull up a map. The River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea.
Can we just stay? Can we just try to stay?
Okay, I'll say it differently. I'll say it differently.
I'm trying to allow the program to happen. Okay. All right.
Thank you, Jeff.
It's very interesting that people who are standing there unashamedly supporting violence and murder are trying to impose their rules on the majority of people here by stating what they like or don't like. It's absolutely ludicrous that people who support this horrific violence against innocent civilians dare to make conditions to allow the majority of the people to have a conversation. And there's somebody over there standing with a shirt with a symbol of one of the worst, most violent terrorist organizations, an organization that is probably the most violent, although the best trained and the best armed terrorist organization in the world, and she's wearing their T-shirt. She's wearing a T-shirt of a terrorist organization. I'm just pointing it out. She's wearing a shirt that is offensive.
You're calling people out in the audience.
Yes, she's wearing it. If I wore a swastika, you wouldn't call me out? If I stood here with a Confederate flag, if I displayed a Confederate flag, would you not call me out? That is offensive. That is offensive. There are Palestinians here, there are Muslims here, and that is offensive. It's like somebody standing here with a Confederate flag. It is unacceptable. And there are Jewish people here, many Jewish people here, who find it offensive. There's a coalition of people here who find it offensive.
Yes. I'm an Israeli. I am entitled and allowed to.
No, you're not. Of course, entitled. Israelis are always entitled.
I'm going to take a moderator prerogative here and ask, get us on track with one simple question. Let's say we were in the first Bethlehem, and we were all Israelis. What would happen to us if we were having this conversation? All right, if we were having this conversation, okay, yeah. Okay, if we were having this conversation in Israel in the actual Bethlehem, right, the first one, what would happen to all of us
in Palestine?
Yeah, yeah. What would happen?
If we were Palestinians?
If we were Israelis, we were Israeli citizens
right now
having this conversation about the war.
Right now, in the state of Israel, this conversation would not be allowed. It would not be allowed. It would either be canceled or we would have been arrested by the Israeli authorities. By the Israeli authorities.
That's not.
Okay. I think we're.
All right. Let's go back to this. Okay. Let's go back to this. Let's go back to this.
We're done.
Oh my God.
I'm shutting it down. Why?
Let him speak! 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 Let him speak!
We're about to have
You know what? Why can't you just ask them to leave? They don't even want to hear it. They don't even want to hear it.
Everyone. I know everyone's is really heightened. Let's all take a moment and relax. We got a speaker here. My name is Iyad. I'm with the coalition to end the violence in Palestine. He is a personal friend of mine, all right? Miko has been a friend of mine for a long time. But I'm speaking as a Palestinian. Please, everyone, calm down. Let's end the event. Let's end the event on good terms. Let's get the event going. If people continue to shut this down, he's not going to not come back to Albany again. We'll get him here again because he's a friend of mine. We'll get him here again.
Yeah,
but let's finish the event.
Yes.
20 minutes? We got 20 minutes.
Please respect our space. We respect your boards.
You made it to me last night.
All right, we're doing 20 minutes.
Yeah, but why are you here if you don't enjoy it? Why? What is there to enjoy?
Walk away.
We all want to hear it.
Hello, everyone. Everyone, quiet for a moment, please.
So walk away.
Please be quiet.
Everyone,
Please be quiet.
my name is Caroline Brancatella. I'm a member of the board. This is Mark Kissinger. He is president of the board. Many of you saw us last night.
Yes.
I would like to make something clear. There is no legal definition of hate speech. That being said, everyone has an opportunity to communicate if they think that has happened. When something that was said that is generally accepted as problematic, Jeff got up to the front of the room and he stopped it. I understand that other things are being said here tonight that people may have an issue with. What we ask you to do is we ask you to also exercise your First Amendment right and communicate that to the board, to the library staff, and to the board. There are mechanisms to do that. They are available. Am I correct, Jeff, that they are available on our website? Mark and I are also here, and we are happy to give you that information. Once that information is communicated to us, the library staff and the board have the opportunity to consider it and consider what actions we may take either in our policies or who may make use of our policies. So I understand.
Let her finish.
Don't back down to the crowd.
We're not backing down.
We are not going to back down to the crowd. I would like to ask everyone who has thoughts on what is being said here tonight to allow them to be said.
It's too late.
And, excuse me.
Yeah.
To allow them to be said and then to communicate your reasons and your belief why you think they are hate speech. We are not the arbiters of hate speech. Like I said, there is no legal definition of it. But we are a library board who can consider your thoughts and your opinions on that and how that fits into the community once that speech is spoken. No, he didn't. I am in the interest of free speech all around. As the gentleman said, let's finish the program. Let's let everyone use their First Amendment rights to the best of their ability this evening. Mark and I are going to go stand outside. If you have questions about how to communicate to us, you are welcome to do so. Jeff, as library director, will continue to stand in this room as a witness to what is being said. And if a specific phrase is repeated again, am I correct, Jeff, that you will take action against that? Thank you, everyone. There was wonderful dialogue in the library last night. It was peaceful. We would like to maintain that peace. Thank you.
I'd like to once again reiterate the thanks to the Bethlehem Public Library for being brave and putting this on. All right, so we're now going to take another 3 questions. Is that okay? Do you have one more? You don't have time. Okay, yeah, keep going.
But
Okay.
just don't say Mississippi, okay? I don't want to hear it.
Okay. So let me. I'll finish. I think it's fair enough to answer the questions that were asked. They were good questions. So regarding the Oslo time, the Oslo time was very interesting because many of us who are still naive and believe in liberal democracy, liberal Zionism, like myself, and many others, thought that this is early 90s. The Soviet Union fell, apartheid fell, Mandela became president, and there was a sense that Palestine is next. And I think this helped feed this notion that if Mandela was free, if de Klerk could receive the Nobel Peace Prize, then yes, even a war criminal like Yitzhak Rabin can become a peacemaker. And I remember my father, who of course knew Rabin very well because they worked together for decades, said when Rabin shook hands with Arafat that Rabin crossed the Rubicon. In other words, he made this gesture that is irreversible, that makes a statement. This was end of 1993. My father died in March of 1995. The last article he wrote was titled Requiem to Oslo. And then just before he died, there were several interviews with him in the major Israeli papers where he said Rabin does not want peace, Israel does not want peace. And Rabin was getting the Nobel Peace Prize. And people said to him, what are you talking, you say this? He said, well, read the Accords. The Oslo Accords are not leading to peace. Look at what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. It is very clear that Israel has no interest in peace. And today, in hindsight, of course, it's 50-50, 2020, whatever it is, it's clear that the reality we live in today is the direct result of Oslo. Oslo was a spectacular success. The Oslo process led Israel to tougher control on the Palestinians, on their land, and on their basically life and the country itself. So again, when we look back and we see what happened over the decades, it's clear that the purpose of Oslo was to happen what we see now, which is Israel basically controlling all of Palestine. Palestinians have less and less rights. So there was never, ever an Israeli effort to make peace. There was no interest, like I said, by Israel to make peace. And I think the quote about the opportunity to miss out an opportunity is just one more racist, anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian slogan that I think we all know is not really worthy of any attention.
Okay, so we're ready for another three?
I am.
Yep. Okay.
My voice is
All
still
right.
working.
Okay.
Okay. This is basically a question that I have written. I have no dog in this affair at all. I'm an atheist.
You pay taxes, right?
And what I say is that there is utterly no solution. You can see the passion of the crowd. If you continue to believe in something that has no basis in fact. The only solution for the Middle East is atheism and make it into a park and end this religion and class and ethnic divide that is now simple, sad murder.
Okay. All right. Second. Good question. Did you have?
David.
Okay, so you meant, I was intrigued by the comment, the suggestion that you made about the education for the Palestinian right. So I was wondering, what do you think, or who do you think can spearhead this proper education for Palestinian without being labeled as anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist? Clearly the previous efforts are not working well.
And a third. All right, yeah, you go back here.
I'm just curious to know your thoughts on what is going to happen over the next month, 2 months in Gaza.
All right.
All right, so the gentleman with a no dog, where do you go? If you pay taxes in this country, then you have a dog in the game. I'm sorry. Americans, unless they stand up clearly in opposition to Zionism and clearly support the Palestinian call for justice, freedom, and equality, are complicit in war crimes. I'm sorry. Because, and I know this I know this sounds, very harsh, but, this country claims to be a democracy. The people who vote to send the billions of dollars and the weapons to Israel are elected by us. The politicians that have no problem associating themselves with Zionism, which, like I said earlier, like anti-Semitism and white supremacy is a racist ideology, are voted by us. Why in the world would you vote for somebody who declares that they support racism? Why in the world would you vote for anybody who sends weapons to a country that we know now, because Amnesty told us, but we've known before that through reality, is engaged in crimes against humanity? So you have a dog in the game as long as you pay taxes. And so I think it's important for Americans to wake up and realize the reality in which they exist. Now, religion is not the issue. The Zionists were atheists. The Zionists were atheists. They wanted nothing to do with religion. Yes. They looked at the Orthodox Jews, and you should see what Herzl and Jabotinsky and some of these other, founders of Zionism, what they said about the religious Jews. Yes. You should read the kind of language they used to describe the Jews. They were atheists, so the religion is not the issue. Racism and violence is the issue, and I will say more. Prior to Zionism, the different religions that made up the mosaic of the Holy Land and the mosaic of the Middle East, lived side by side. Talk to people who used to live, the older Jewish population who used to live in the old city of Jerusalem next to Muslims, or in Hebron next to Muslims. There was a life of friendship and kinship, and other countries and other Arab countries. So it's not a religious issue. Thank you. It's not about religion. In fact, I'm not a religious person, but I certainly think there are beautiful aspects in religion as well. So I wouldn't say that. The other thing is this. Somehow discounting the region as worthless because of what is happening now is I think is horrifying. Palestine has a rich and beautiful history and a rich and beautiful culture, and has contributed greatly to the cultures of the world. There's a wonderful book, there are a lot of wonderful books, but there's a wonderful book by the Palestinian historian Nur Masalha, and it's called Palestine, a 4,000-year history. Read it. Palestine, and by the way, in this book he shows, as a historian, as a scientist, how the name Palestine was used to describe this country going back to the days of the ancient Egyptians and the Greeks and the Assyrians and the Babylonians and on and on and on. So Palestine is a rich, beautiful country, and a country that has been marked mostly throughout history, with the exception of times when there were, incursions and conquests by foreigners, by tolerance. And you can talk to anybody who lived prior to 1948. And I'll tell you an interesting story, because you bring out this issue of religion. I'll tell you an interesting story. In the year 1900, Zionism was just beginning, right? The year 1900. The major rabbis of the time published a book, Orlei Sharim. They published it in Hebrew. And basically this book was a warning to Jewish people of the dangers of Zionism and the dangers of this idea of a Jewish state. Now, like I said earlier, the Jewish state contravenes Jewish law. So it has nothing to do with religion. This is a secular idea. And in this book, they said basically three things. And mind you, this is pre-World War II. There were millions, these rabbis represented millions of Jewish people. They said, this Jewish state, so to speak, that the Zionists want will bring violence to the Holy Land. And we know the first acts of terrorism in the Holy Land were by the Haganah, were by the Israeli terrorist groups, 1924, I believe, or even before that. They said that this idea will destroy the good relations that exist between Jews and Muslims and Jews and Arabs throughout the world. And there were large Jewish communities in Arab countries, including Palestine, of course. And they said, this will cast doubt as to the loyalty of Jewish people who live around the world as religious minorities. So are you a member of this? Is it loyal to this country or to your country? And these three things happened. Today we look at these three things. This is the reality. This is the reality today. And so these were deeply, deeply religious rabbis who predicted that this political, secular idea is going to bring all of this violence and all of this destruction and all of this hate to the region. And they were absolutely right. So again, I just want to say it's not a religious or atheist issue. It's an issue, it's a political issue, it's an issue of racism, and it's an issue of settler colonialism. Now, who can spearhead this idea without being labeled? Nobody. There's no way, as I think we've seen tonight, there is no way that you can present the Palestinian cause, the Palestinian case, without the minority, the minority of racists and so on, attacking you for being anti-Semitic, because that's the tool they have. The problem is this: the Zionist story, compelling as it may be, is based on lies. The Palestinian story is simple; it's the truth. So I still think it needs to be done. And it can be done by an Israeli, it can be done by Palestinian, it can be done jointly, it can be done by Jews, by Christians, by Muslims. It doesn't really matter, as long as it's done faithfully and as long as it's done truthfully and above board. But it has to be done either way, and I don't think there's a way in today's atmosphere, particularly in America today, in the atmosphere that exists today, where one side is so violent and so unwilling to opposed to tolerance. There's no way to do it without taking the risk of being labeled and so on. But it's the risk of silence, I think, is worse. Yeah. The price of silence is worse. Let's do three more, and then I think my voice is done.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So excuse me one second. Do you feel like you? Okay. I'm gonna give you.
A lot of times, there's this situation where everybody stands for Israel and for Palestine, and we forget that there's a human element in this. And the question is, how can we move forward from this? Where do we go from here? And what does that look like?
Hi, I just need to say, first of all, I grieve for everyone. I grieve for the thousands of Palestinians. I grieve for the Jewish hostages, and I grieve for the people who are fighting, who are being killed in a war that should not be the way it is. However, I just want to comment that most of what I have heard you say is based in 1900, 1950. The Six-Day War was 1967. I'm the mom of young adults who are committed to change, who are committed to making things happen. And I think that some of the things that you have said do not take into account the many Jewish and Palestinian groups that are working towards peace, the many young people who believe that Palestinians and Jewish people can live together. And I would encourage people here to look at both sides. If you're going to look at the Palestinian book, look at a book by Noah Tishby about Israel.
That's your question. And one more to round it out. I don't feel like we've heard from enough women, so I'm going to grab a woman room.
Thank you.
Oh, I know. I just remembered that. I'll answer that. Yes, I'll answer that.
You spoke of Oslo. Oslo indeed gave us separate governments for Palestinians. We have the PA in the West Bank, and we have an elected Hamas as the government in Gaza. Hamas is a thug, terrorist group. We had a ceasefire, essentially a ceasefire. I mean, they've been sending missiles into Sderot and Netivot practically daily, every day. But we had a ceasefire on October 6th. A ceasefire now, means more October 7th, more murder, more rape of Jews. Do you, Miko, my question is, Miko, do you support
the murder and the rape.
Okay, no, we're not doing it. We're not doing it.
Okay, I'll go back to the question that I missed before. I think it was what to expect in Gaza over the next 2-3 weeks, something like that.
2 months.
2 months.
Okay, so I'm going to expand on that a little bit, and to give some context at the risk of angering a few people.
And we have 5 minutes.
And we have 5 minutes, so.
Answer those questions in 5 minutes.
The events of October 7, I think, was a watershed moment, without any question. And because we only have 5 minutes, I won't get into too many details. And I don't think there should be any negotiations about anything other than an absolute political arrangement, a political agreement that will guarantee the safety and security of Palestinians. Until that is this moment right now that we see, where there's an estimated body count of 50,000 civilians at the end of a 75-year era where Palestinians have been living in terror, requires us to demand nothing less than absolute freedom, absolute equality, the dismantling of the apartheid state, and an absolute free Palestine an absolute free Palestine on all of historic Palestine. Nothing less than that. Now, the problem is that is never not being demanded. The problem is that all people are asking for is a ceasefire. And a ceasefire is something that Israel historically violates on a regular basis. So I'm not anticipating anything good happening in the short term unless, and as you were asking the question, our friend here said, oh God, I don't want to hear the answer to that. Nothing good is going to happen over the next weeks, perhaps months, unless all these massive protests that we're seeing, 500,000 in DC and God knows how many around the world, demand the absolute end to the killing of Palestinians and the absolute guarantee to the safety and security of Palestinians. This must mean severe sanctions against the state of Israel. This must mean boycotts against the state of Israel. This must mean a no-fly zone over Gaza. This means severe actions. And the sad thing is, I don't see these demands being made anywhere. Everybody always settles when it comes to Palestinian rights, to Palestinian lives. People always settle for the littlest, the minimum possible. Just pulling back what was done so that Israel can do it again. So I think there is definitely a potential right now, because it was a watershed moment for everyone. And I have family in Israeli families. You know, I have a Israeli family who lives in Jerusalem. And so this was a watershed moment for everyone. What we do with this opportunity, I believe, depends on us, because the Palestinian issue has no parent, like I said. We have to do it. I understand there's 2 more minutes. I'll try to answer.
Absolutely, we are.
Okay, the gentleman in the middle who asked about, you stand for Israel, you stand for Palestine. Look, you either stand for racism or you stand against racism. That's what it's about. Of course it's about people. It's all about people. It's all about people. It's all about people. It's all about people. You know how many Palestinian friends I have whose children are being kidnapped, whose fathers have been abducted, whose sisters and mothers and parents have been killed? It's like nothing. It's not even news. Of course it's about the people. It's about the people who are subjected to violence and racism and their right to freedom and rights and equal rights. That's what this is all about. Their right to freedom, their right to justice. That's what it's about. This entire conversation, this entire issue. It's not Israel-Palestine. It's about the rights of people to live free, and in dignity. And I think in that we are done. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Miko. Thank you, the Bethlehem Public Library. Have a good night, everyone. Good episode.